Hi, Josh.
Hello, David.
So good to have you here on Blogging Heads TV. We're both using Windows machines, I think, doing this for the first time. So we'll apologize in advance if there's any technological glitches. And as you can see from having viewed this perhaps in the past, we're rather informal. We have in fact, it's almost mandatory, according to Bob Wright and Mickey Couse, that you talk about things that you don't know anything about, and that you also talk about a few things that you do know something about. And so again, glad to have you here. And let's start off by talking about perhaps, the biggest establishment prize in journalism, which is the Pulitzers. And they were awarded this week. I'm looking at the list now, and what impressed me, and I usually, as someone not well-rooted in mainstream media, I often tend to, turn up my nose at prizes like this, often because I'm not going to get one myself. But nevertheless, it's good to have a superior attitude whenever you can. And looking at the list, I was really impressed. A lot of good investigative reporting. We have Sue Schmidt, James Grimaldi, and R. Jeffrey Smith of the Washington Post for the Abramoff story. Right. You had Dana Priest, friend of mine from the Washington Post, who did the CIA prisons. You had Eric Lichtblau and James Reiser in the New York Times for the wiretapping story. And you had the San Diego Union Tribune and Copley News Service for exposing Duke Cunningham.
Yeah, I was particularly excited about the last, not just because of the story I follow, just because, for obvious reasons, the Times and the Post sort of monopolize these awards. And the other thing is, there's all these theories about how Sue Schmidt came by the initial lead that sort of broke open the Abramoff story. But this guy, Marcus Stern, who's with, I never quite understand how with a news service like Copley, you're with Copley News Service, but you're also sort of dedicated to the, one of the individual papers, and in this case it was the San Diego Union Tribune. There was all this speculation about whether some enemy of Cunningham, dropped a dime on him or something like that. But at least what Marcus says is that he was just doing kind of good old-fashioned spade work, going through deeds of politicians' houses and came across this. So I like it just for the fact that, that's an award that was really generated in a story that was broken the old-fashioned way, not because you're the sort of the, you're the go-to person for malicious leaks at the Times or the Post or something like that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
And I know there have been conspiracy theories in some of the liberal blogs about Susan Schmidt at the Washington Post and how she came on the Abramoff story. I have to say, the pieces that she did with her colleagues were absolutely fantastic.
No question.
Two
Absolutely
great
no
stories.
question.
The wire fraud story, figuring out that Abramoff had, and his buddy Adam Cadan had forged a $23 million or $21 million wire bank transfer, and then the whole story about the murder of their business partner, mob-style murder down in Florida. Tremendously good work. I don't care how she got it, and people at the Post tell me that that it wasn't a planted story the way some are, but even if it had been, I don't care. Now we should tell viewers that since it's kind of probably irrelevant since your site gets a lot more traffic than Blogging Heads TV, that you run TalkingPointsMemo.com, but There's also now a sister organization called TPM. Is it TP Muckraker? Or
TPM Muckraker.
TPMMuckraker.com.
Yes.
And so you have real interest in investigative reporting. Why don't you tell us a little bit here, take it away for a commercial, what TPM Muckraker is trying to do?
Well, the concept there is, there are a lot of blogs that do investigative reporting, but it's the standard, it's the standard problem that every small publication runs up against. Investigative reporting takes a lot of time and resources, and I've done it on my site for a long time, but there's only so much you can do. So what I did is raise some money, and I hired 2 full-time reporters who are basically spending all their time muckraking and blogging about it.
Are these guys doing their own investigative original reporting, or are they aggregating, working off, finding things already out there in the media?
they're doing a little of both. I mean, obviously, that with two full-time people, there's no way that we can, have the amount of content that you need to have a blog succeed, all based on original reporting. So a lot of the material that appears on the site is aggregating, commenting on, explaining the way that I do on my site, the way that a lot of other bloggers do on their site. But a lot of it is good old-fashioned original investigative reporting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and do these Pulitzer Prizes, I don't want to read too much into just 1 year's worth. I mean, the Bush has been very good for business, as we say. But what do they say to you about the health status of investigative reporting, at least in the mainstream media these days?
I think it's a positive story. I mean, again, I think what you said before about the Post reporting on Abramoff has been amazing. I guess I think too that we're kind of coming off a series of journalism scandals that really brought investigative reporting. I mean, it's a question if you even want to call it investigative reporting, but brought investigative reporting sort of into disrepute. I mean, you had, going back into the late 90s, the Wenho Lee case, a lot of the Whitewater reporting in the late 90s, Judy Miller's reporting on the WMD stuff, where you had access reporting, in a lot of cases fairly tendentious access reporting, kind of masquerading as investigative journalism. So I think it says something positive about the state of the profession. I mean, where are you on this?
Listen, I spent 20 years doing the type of journalism I do because I don't think it gets done by other people. But I'm happy, to say now that that these awards show that a lot of great journalism on, I think, important issues. I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, was it last year the Times won the Pulitzer for a great series on safety at train crossings across the country, which was a wonderful piece. But being Washington-oriented, as I am, being in Washington, I wanted to see that type of digging applied to the scoundrels of Washington.
Right.
And now I see that happening. And I think it's also interesting that it's coming late in the Bush administration, where a lot of air is out of the balloon, where I think people, within the administration or close to it, start getting a little more fed up. Obviously, somebody had to tell Jim Risen about the wiretapping program, and it was probably somebody who thought it was going too far. And that probably would not have happened, closer to September 11th and closer to the Afghanistan war.
Right.
So, I mean, these things, end up sort of playing themselves out over the long run in Washington. But I'm happy. I'm happy to tip my hat, to the big boys and big girls of media when they do something right. And I hope this, as we like to say, incentivizes, the Times and the Post and others to do more of this work.
Right.
Although it may put you and I out of business.
Well, I think, going back to, there's the site we have, but also just all these other, John Erebosis's site and, just so many other different blogs doing, kind of part-time, and in a lot of cases really part-time investigative journalism, when these people have full-time jobs. But I think, a lot of times we'll break something open a bit, but we're not the Times or the Post, so we can't, we call the White House, they can just blow us off, they can ignore us. But sometimes, and I think a lot of blogs do this, even though blogs don't have the muscle behind them to force answers out of a congressional office or the White House or something like that, they can kind of pose the question, and then other news outlets that have more muscle can break them open entirely. So I think there can actually be a symbiotic relationship between blogs and in the mainstream media in terms of doing investigative journalism.
I think that's a good point. I'd like to see more of that. I was going to talk about Bill Bennett saying that these Pulitzer Prizes for treason because they expose government secrets and so on. But I think we'll pass on that because we should move on to our next subject, which is also a media subject. It's Scott McClellan leaving the White House. And I was just on British TV talking about this, and they asked me if there was anything sinister behind this move. Also the move of Korov supposedly giving up his oversight of the policy shop of the White House and staying in the White House as a strategist, a political strategist. And I told the Brits that I don't think this was a matter of anybody coming along and saying, Scott McClellan, you must leave, you're being fired. I think it was probably coming in and saying, you're free to go now if you'd like. And he said, yippee, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a happier guy in Washington today than Scott McClellan?
It's funny. I thought that I heard someone say that he didn't want to leave. But you're in there. You're actually. I'm never actually in the press room, so you know the guy. So you'd know better than I would. Your sense is that he's happy to be going.
I don't know him well. I go to press briefings only occasionally. I just can't believe that he would enjoy that job. I mean,
right.
He comes out with the most patently absurd things to say, and then he has to say them not once, but 37 times.
Right.
Even when reporters point out the illogic of his remarks, he has to sort of grin and eat it and just repeat the remark. And, of course, he's not in on, I don't think he's in on the conversation, the White House, about what the media or communication strategy should be.
Right.
They kind of do that, and they tell him what to say. And, it might be fun. It might have been fun for the first couple of months, but not for a couple of years.
Yeah. Well, here's a question you would know the answer to. My impression, and it's certainly not, this is just casual conversations with friends of mine who are White House reporters. My sense was always that, whereas a lot of those guys and gals really did not like Ari Fleischer or grew to dislike him, that people didn't feel the same way about McClellan. I mean, as much as he's sort of demonized, or not demonized, sort of...
Ari Fleischer, it's a big word, but people thought he was evil, and that he had a hand in what was happening. He was making the decisions. He was so glib and so smooth, and kind of took pride in outfoxing the other journalists. So I don't think there was a lot of affection created. I think with Scott, a lot of people see him as the poor schlub they sent out there to do the dirty work, and it's not really his fault. And otherwise, he's sort of a nice guy to have a beer with. So they're not really holding him responsible, and there's this sort of feel your pain sentiment amongst reporters. Even reporters I know who are, more of a liberal bent, who have no brief for the White House or what they're doing. They still end up sympathizing with him, and so you don't have that visceral antipathy that you had with Ari. But yet, I think it's Scott McClellan, and in the leak case and others, who has really gotten the dander up of the reporters
Didn't Fleischer leave like a week or two before the Wilson thing really busted open?
Yeah, well, he left it was the week of the leak itself. So right in the middle of the Niger stuff. He went on the trip to Africa, came back, and then passed things off to Scott McClellan. So really, one of his first press briefings happened after the news broke that the CIA had asked the White House had asked the Justice Department to investigate the White House on the leak. And from the get-go, he was saying things that, as we now know, were completely false, such as Karl Rove was not involved. But the interesting thing, too, I mean, people are asking whether Karl Rove being relieved of oversight of policy is a demotion or really means anything. I mean, I don't know. To me, if you think of Bush and Rove, it's like beer and nuts. You can't really have one without the other. And as long as he's in the White House and not sent to Sardinia, it really doesn't matter what his job is.
Yeah, that's my sense too. I mean, I was a little unclear. I mean, I guess one way of interpreting that is it's just an optics decision that this can, that for Republicans looking for sort of something to grasp onto, that something's going to change. I mean, it's always. I mean, the idea of having Karl Rove be the policy guy is just so. It is such an emblem of cynicism, that you would have this guy have that role. I mean, but I agree with you. It's hard for me to imagine. Is there any decision that he had control over yesterday that he's not going to have control over tomorrow? I can't imagine.
Right, and what policies are really being made in the White House these days anyway? I mean, they did Social Security, that didn't really work. They've done all the tax cutting I think they can get away with. And, is invading Iran a policy? Does it fall into policy, politics, or just, we want to do it? I mean, it's just, so it's hard for, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that Josh Bolton, the new chief of staff at the White House, will have a closer and more important relationship with Bush than Karl Rove has or will. And if you don't, and I think you said this in your blog and today, Talking Points Memo, and we really shouldn't be agreeing too much. But what the hell? That with I just lost that thought. So you tell me, you were saying that with Bolton and replacing Rove, what was your fine point that you made?
Oh, well, the one point that it's hard to imagine that any decision, that Rove has given up any control here. What's also impossible to believe, to the way I think of things, is the idea that Bolton has actually been empowered to.
Oh, no. This was the point.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you get this. That everyone is, being talked about is still within the Bush bubble.
Right.
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 Yeah. So you're not going to bring in a press secretary who's sort of out of the bubble. You may bring in. They're talking about other press secretaries, like Tony Snow. Maybe by the time this airs, we'll know. But if you don't bring in sort of an outside advisor or a group of advisors who have a different perspective, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah. No. Well, especially that I think a lot of these. A lot of basic decision making. There's. A lot. Karl Rove is sort of a good example of this. That I think, at the beginning he was just a kind of a senior advisor or something like that.
Yeah.
In 2001,
Mm-hmm.
then I guess he was, he was deputy chief of staff. He was this. He was policy advisor. But again, I mean, the real power in the White House is, those kind of titles are fairly fictive. I think, especially in a White House like this, where there's so little true turnover.
Right.
With Clinton, you actually had new people come in. You had, Mac McClarty left. You had David. I mean, I'm sure the people who were in the White House thought it was a very...
It was like a revolving door in that White House.
Yeah, well, especially when you had like David Gergen come in. That was certainly seen as a...
Well, that was a stab in the back. I remember at that point, I wrote a piece and said, stick a knife in the Clinton administration. It's done.
Yeah.
They were just going to be mush after that.
Mm-hmm.
Little did we know what we were in for.
Yeah.
But not much in the way of policy progress. So I think I think we're stuck. Everyone's stuck with Bush. Bush is stuck with Bush.
Yeah.
And while it's easy to sit here on the left and root for his downfall, at some point, you got to root for the country as well.
Right.
And he's still the president. They still make decisions that affect us and the rest of the world all the time. And I just wish they'd bring in, some other bulbs who could sort of, because we got over 2.5 years left of this guy.
Right. Right. Well, the thing is too, and I got into this a bit on the site today, that this issue of who wants to replace Jon Snow at Treasury is sort of a basic question. But also I think that they're sort of stuck now, since there's so much. I don't mean just secrets in the sense of criminal acts that have taken place that they don't want to let anybody else in on, but they are bringing in new people, not whether it's because they need to be confirmed, or whether, if you bring in someone new, if there's any sense that this is actually new blood, new thinking, you got to get into what old thinking you're going to get rid of.
Yeah.
And they're so committed. I mean, their main policy right now is sort of institutional denial.
Well, that's a good way of putting it. That's and that's the whole thing with the rummy business, and that's you had Bush the other day saying, I'm the decider.
Right.
I couldn't have just put a term to the problem better than that. But let's move on.
Yes.
Because we're becoming blogging heads. The Libby trial. You and I are probably one of the 7 people in this great land who just are obsessed over the whole Niger case and the documents and the forgeries. But it's all coming to a head with to a degree, with the trial of Scooter Libby, which Fitzgerald wants to focus on the simple issue of whether he lied to and 2 grand jury appearances and 2 interviews with the FBI. But the Libby defense team so far is just being a tremendous boom for us. By trying to make it bigger about what was authorized by Cheney and the National Intelligence Estimate and what Scooter Libby was doing, and they put a filing out last week in which they suggested that they might call Karl Rove to the stand. I can't think of anything that Karl Rove in the White House would want less. Even putting Cheney up there would probably be better than putting Karl Rove up. And I'm in a total quandary here. Because, maybe you can help me out. Because I had always assumed that Scooter Libby's ace in the hole was the presidential pardon fairy.
Yeah.
That if he plays good and, takes it to court and loses, that, just like what happened with Elliot Abrams, a Bush president would come along at the end of the day and say, you're one of our guys, and give him a pardon. And that would be the end of it. And
he could probably stay out on appeal to almost through the end of the presidency anyway.
Oh, I don't think you'd have to, get behind bars at all.
Right.
But the case that they're mounting so far has been roping in Rove and Cheney can only PO the White House and make them think less favorably about Scooter when it comes to, presidential pardon time. What's your take?
I was actually going to ask you. I'm up here in New York now. I'm a little more cut off from this kind of stuff. I mean, it's not just that I thought he the pardon issue. Libby's also got that website. That Scooter Libby Foundation.
Yeah, it's ScooterLibby.com.
Right, and he's got. So he's definitely. To every appearance, he is sort of, chosen his friends, and he's, he is in there with the sort of the made men of the the neocon mafia, and so I don't get what their angle is exactly, because at a certain point I would think those guys are going to stop as aggressively raising money for him.
They've raised millions so far, and he also has a job at the Hudson Institute, a conservative think tank, and
which is another way to take care of him.
I'm all for each side taking care of their own. It's okay.
Right.
They want to put an accused liar on the staff. Well, we'll see whether he's what a jury finds at the end of the day. But that's why I've been perplexed by this.
Well, but
he hasn't. There's still at the end of the day. He may, his side may not call Rove, they may not call Cheney, they may drop some of this. It may just be a way to, throw as much crap as they can at Fitzgerald at the beginning and just try to, mess up the case as the best way they can. But if you put Rove on the stand, I had a piece on The Nation in my own blog this week in which I just threw out just a couple of questions. I didn't even think too hard about it. I hate to tell people that's what goes into some of the writing sometimes, about what you'd ask Karl Rove. How did you find out that Valerie Wilson was working at the CIA? Because he was on Novak's sauce. Who else knew? When did you tell the president that you were a leaker? There are a lot of things that Fitzgerald could easily ask him.
Yeah.
And, Katie barred the door.
Right. Well, this is the thing I don't exactly understand. It's and this would be interesting to hear what a real criminal defense lawyer would say about this. But in the information that's come out from the Libby camp in the last 3 or 4 weeks, it seems like they're going out of their way to kind of, to stick it to the White House, or at least to telegraph what they might have coming down the pike. Now, I don't doubt for a second that President Bush would pardon Scooter Libby 3 days before he leaves the White House. But if you didn't know better, you would almost think he is signaling that he wants to get out of this now. And obviously, that is the one thing that I think could actually get Bush impeached. If he
Don't start me on impeachment, please.
But I'm not even in practice, I'm not a supporter of it. I'm just saying that I think if President Bush preemptively,
I might hit the stop button if we talk about impeachment.
Okay.
I think Bush could, basically invade Canada, and the Republicans won't impeach him. I don't care what he does in this.
You may be right.
But there's, if there's a presidential pardon, they'll do it in the best way, and they'll hold out on this. Although, we do see, Bush has a stubborn streak, which has caused a few geopolitical problems as well. So, I guess I'm of two minds, and one mind is I wouldn't put anything past him. We mentioned that Bush is down in the polls. In the media, the generals revolt against Remy. The Republicans are getting worried because of the war and the congressional elections coming up in the fall. What do you think the Democrats' hopes? Are they fully taking advantage of the opportunities that are being presented to them? And feel free to engage in as much Democratic bashing as you'd like. Or not.
Here's the thing. I'm disappointed a lot by things I see them doing. I do, the standard line is that the Democrats don't have a message. They're not, they're not unified. They're not this or that or the other. I really do think, when you go back to, there's this. I don't know about you, but when I think back to this time in 1994 and the 6 months in the lead up to the 1994 midterm election, the Republicans didn't have any message beside being really, really anti-Clinton. That was their message. They had, at the end they sort of lifted up.
They had the contract with America.
Yeah, but that was late in the game.
Yeah.
And it was there was very little in there that was of any substance at all. And I don't mean just from like a democratic perspective. There are a few little procedural things. I really think that basically there was there were several things going on. One of the things was that you had a unpopular Democratic president. You had the first time in about a generation where you had an unpopular Democratic president at the same time as a Democratic Congress. And the Democratic Congress, the Democratic majority on the Hill could always sort of, play against the fact that there was a Republican president, or had been able to for 12 years. And so it was just a perfect storm. Clinton was unpopular. They had redistricting behind them. They just kind of put up their sails, and it brought them into the majority. So I'm not saying the Democrats can just sit on their butts and do nothing. I do think it's sort of overstated the extent to which an out party needs a clear policy agenda, a clear agenda at all. Well, I don't think the Republicans had it in '94.
So you're agreeing with Newt Gingrich?
Well, that's a good reason not to change my mind. But
because I don't know, it was a week or two back. I read he came up with what I thought was a pretty good slogan for the Democrats.
Oh, that had enough?
Had enough? That's all I had.
No.
Had
yeah.
enough?
No, I actually, it's funny. I think in a way I think in a way I have shied away from embracing that slogan just because Newt came up with it. But honestly,
well, let's be honest. Let's be fair.
No, I think it's a great slogan. I think it is, and it really does capture. If you think about it,
it captures everything.
Yeah, no, it captures the whole thing. Just and Newt is, I wrote a piece. I reviewed. He had this sort of manifesto. It may have even been called like the something. He had a new, Contract with America for the 21st century book that came out a couple months ago, and I reviewed it. And generally, I panned it, but there was a part when Gingrich had his own kind of genius.
Oh,
when it came, he was terrible at managing anything, but when it came to political rhetoric and capturing. Capturing the political. I think Democrats a lot are great on the libretto of politics.
Okay.
And terrible when it comes to the score. And Republicans are really good. You think about Wagner.
Wait a second. Anyone who goes to the opera will tell you the libretto doesn't matter.
Exactly. A libretto is the sort of the inconsequential, filler.
Especially when it's in Italian.
Well, even more when it's even more when it's in a foreign language. But that's really the key. That I think, in some ways, when people talk about, well, the Democrats need a health care plan to run on, in 2006, that's ridiculous. I think what you need to do is, if I were a political consultant and I were putting together a commercial, that would be the slogan, and you would have just a montage of a few of those kind of really, awkward, terrible kind of lie moments where the administration has had to eat its words, a few people being indicted, just that sense of like enough.
And if you were a political consultant advising the Democrats, you would say, hey, forget the libretto, sing for me.
Yeah. That's what moves people, and Gingrich was really good at that.
Yeah, well,
he was really good at that.
Yeah, he also was good at picking out not lyrics, but the key buzzwords to put in front of the drum beat, the jungle drum beat that he created for his own musical score.
Right.
I can't tell what's going to come. No, I don't think anyone can in the fall. Everyone's talked about how the districts are so much more gerrymandered than they were in the past. That it makes it hard for for putting up your sail and catching the wind, as you put it a few moments ago. It still boils down to the Democrats need to pick up 15 seats, and if say only 40 to let's say 40 seats are in play, they got to win 28 out of the 40.
Right.
That's that's pretty good. That's better hitting than Ted Williams. And I look at the party and put aside their inability to come up with a message on health care, or perhaps more aptly, the war in Iraq.
Right.
I just don't see them as being, great ball players now. They have their moments. Harry Reid and Dick Durbin, had a great strategy for beating back Bush and Social Security. I actually liked it when they shut down the Senate last year to try to get a Phase 2 report on what Bush had said about the intelligence on the war before the war, which seems to have gone absolutely nowhere now.
Right.
But they just don't strike me as playing at a high enough level. They're like George Mason. Maybe they get a few good games in, they play above themselves, but can they sustain it over 6 games? To get to the Final Four and win. And maybe that's the pessimist to me. I'm in Washington. I look right across at the Senate office building there, and every day I'm sort of whacking myself on the head, saying, "Gosh, why aren't the Democrats doing this or that?"
Right.
So I just you got to have a win, but you got to have a good sail too.
Right. Yeah. I guess what it comes down to me is I just think that the good news is that I don't think big sort of hinge elections happen because the Senate Majority Leader's got some genius working on his staff.
Well, that's true. Let's move on to the next segment. If Mickey Cass was doing this, he'd have his cowbell to ring, and we don't have that, so we just do it metaphorically. But perhaps in a related subject, let's talk about Iran. Now, why might Iran be related to the elections? Well, there are a lot of people out there who are getting very suspicious of the Bush administration. They're kind of on the same glide path as they were in the 2002 elections in terms of Iraq.
Right.
You start ginning things up for the fall, and then try to have legislation passed in Congress right before the election, weeks before the election, on a going to war measure. And are we going to see anything similar like that when it comes to Iran? I tend to think that the options are incredibly limited in Iran. That even if you wanted to use nukes, that it might not work, because if you're going for bunkers under the ground, even a nuke may not actually do that. And all the spillover in terms of what would happen in Iraq. The Iranians would send troops into Iraq in a moment if we did something like this. So does there come a point where even the neocons and the faith-based strategists of the Bush administration have to face and abide by reality?
No.
Okay.
This is
finally we get a debate here. Go ahead.
Well, here's the thing. On the merits, I totally agree with this argument, and this is what I've been thinking for a long time. That like they'd love to invade Iran. They'd love to, there's always been this, all the stuff. Iran's always been the big goal, not Iraq. Blah 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 blah. I think one thing a lot of people don't understand is that Iran is I don't want to be dismissive of Iraqi nationalists, but there's a lot of ways in which it was a put-together country. That Iran is not like that. It's got a real military. It's got a big population. It's so much bigger a thing. We don't really have an army left over to do it with. You have all they could do to light up Iraq. I mean, there's all these reasons where, as much as people on the left might be paranoid about it, that it's just that even with these guys, they know they just have no option.
But still, you believe.
Well, no, here's the thing. There have been too many times over the last 5 years when they have gone ahead and done things that I could not get my head around the idea that they would do it.
Right.
And even to an extent, I really didn't. It surprised me at the time when we were moving towards going into Iraq that Saddam basically called our bluff. He let the inspectors in. He was letting it go through. And I thought that would box us up. And it didn't.
No.
They just went ahead and did it. They just, who cares? They just went ahead and did it. So, and partly, I guess, to give a sense where I am sort of strategically on this, I think it is not a bad thing to sound the alarm just to make clear to these guys, to kind of have an awareness that this could happen, to make it not happen. So, so sometimes I think, look, maybe if it isn't even going to happen, let's be on the safe side and let's sort of ring the bell and have everybody on their guard and publicize how crazy this is and stuff like that. But just experience has led me not to be so sure that these guys won't do something incredibly stupid.
Yeah, well, you can't misunderestimate them, right?
I mean, and again, it's funny, David. It's hard to have an argument because every point you would make, I would totally agree with about all the reasons why it's totally nuts, and even they, you have you have Condi Rice as Secretary of State, but you still have Don Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney.
Just imagine. I'm not in favor of wars for trivial purposes, but just imagine what would happen with the generals and the retired generals if they actually try to do anything in Iran. I mean, that actually could cause a military coup, one that we might even be in favor of.
Yeah. This is probably the question lurking behind this. What did you make of Cy Hirsch's article?
Oh, the one from 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, the New Yorker one.
I mean, Cy's a friend, and I love his stuff. Through all the history that I've looked at, you can almost always find the right plans, and everyone says that they're doing this, and I have no doubt that they have plans. And I think the hardest thing to assess is what level of I don't even know what the word would be for this. What level of readiness are these plans, or willingness?
Right.
You have to use these plans.
Right.
You want to have every option. And
right.
Just the other day, Bush, said no options off the table. And if there, I don't think there's any scenario. I'm just thinking here for a moment, under which I would support using a nuclear weapon, against a non, combat or even a combat target.
Right.
So would should there even be plans to use a nuclear weapon to blow up a bunker below the ground? If you knew they were making a bomb there, if they said they were going to use that bomb in 5 days on Israel
right.
or in Philadelphia, would you still go ahead and do this?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe I'd want at least to be able to think about it. So therefore, yes, write me up the plan.
Right.
To do that. But I just it's hard for me to think that that this is something that they're saying, do us the plan so that we can actually have the option of doing this in the next couple of months.
Well, I mean, if you set aside the nuclear issue of these bunker buster bombs, I mean, obviously you could have a conventional, heavy munitions strike to try to knock some of this stuff down. I mean, I guess I actually got in trouble from some nasty emails from some readers when I said this. That, I mean, I think, one of the things that makes you can't separate our diplomatic heft from our military power, our potential military power.
Right.
And if I wouldn't want a president who has to go into, really serious negotiations I think why ever, again, if you can set aside the nuclear issue, take off, completely rule out some sort of military strike or the threat of force. I mean, the problem just is that kind of, consensus establishment foreign policy thinking makes a lot more sense when you have a president, when you have some people in power who you have any confidence won't do something just really nuts.
Yes. Well, which brings me back to one of my favorite points of recent days, Thomas Friedman.
Yes.
Because, I was just talking with some friends, and this is off point here, but since we're finishing up, I'll make an off point. And that is, the neocons and Bush, I understand their reasons for, but what really got me, Friedman, even though I understand his reasons for, he said they were different than Bush's, in order to sort of bring democracy and gin things up, in Iraq, while Bush was in the Middle East, while Bush was focused on the threat to the United States and the weapons of mass destruction. Bush has since moved more towards the Friedman point of view. But my whole point beforehand was, listen, Thomas Friedman, you can't have the war the way you want it.
Yeah.
There's one option here. Bush takes us to this war. You're giving the keys to the car to this guy and
right.
nobody else.
Right.
And if you don't, trust him on what he's saying about the war or the threat, which Friedman said he didn't, then how can you trust him to do the job right?
Yeah.
And it's hubris, it's an intellectual arrogance to go on and say, well, I know better, and the war will still be good because my reasons, even though they're not the reasons driving this, are the reasons that will come to play here. And
right.
And so that brings you into what you just said about Iran, which is at the end of the day, the guy, the great, I'm the decider. That's George Bush. And so, I want a commander-in-chief or president who has all sorts of options on the table in order to come up with hopefully the wisest policy outcome. But with Bush, it's really giving somebody tools, doesn't know how to handle them appropriately.
No, it's funny. When I look back on, what I was writing before we went into Iraq, this is really... Well, when I think about things I would have done differently, before we went to war, I kind of said categorically it was a mistake and all this kind of stuff. But, to the extent, just on my little site, saying, the basic error that people like myself, I think, made was indulging this conceit or sort of fantasy that because there might be other arguments for a different war, that you unintentionally give cover to someone like Bush, who has, in most cases, I would say, bad motives, and utterly has no idea what he's doing. So it's that, and this is something I'm thinking a lot about as we get into this stuff about Iran, that it's almost this sort of, the folly of abstraction, the idea that you can come up with kind of like a theoretical war with a different president that might be a good idea, but it's just meaningless. And in a political context, it only gives cover to bad actors.
Well, I'm happy to say that I did not make that mistake before Iraq, and that was part of the argument that I used. And it's also important to note here, I saw Bill Oldham, former head of the National Security Agency a few years ago, speak not too long ago, and he said, you got to remember, we do not know what North Korea, what Iraq has, and Paul Pillar, former National Intelligence Officer, said the same thing recently. So there's a lot of assumption making going on these days, And in some ways, while I do worry about Iraq going nuclear, I also think that there's a fair amount of quasi-hysteria about the issue as well, and even Democrats are feeding into that.
Right. No, it's. I think it really behooves everybody in opinion journalism and commentary and politics to sort of, be on guard for every sign of deja vu that you see, and not make any of the mistakes that were made by so many people last time.
Well, I somehow think that Charles Krauthammer and Bill Kristol won't be taking that piece of advice from you, Josh Marshall. But I think that winds things up for us here on Blogging Heads. So thanks so much for doing this, and we'll put links next to our faces for people to go to your two fine sites.
Excellent.
Thanks, and I hope we see you again soon here.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.